Hey, what's up YouTube? Today we're going to create this booking calendar using the MUI library. We are also using the Next.js 13 framework, and what we're going to do here is we're going to allow the user to select a certain date they want to book and also a time frame, or they can select a certain time period. So this is all done again through MUI's library. We are using Next.js 13 framework, Tailwindcss, we're using Prisma, and we're using MongoDB for our database. So I quickly want to demonstrate how this works. We have all the fields filled out. As you can see, we selected the 28th of August, and we're also selecting the time range of 9:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. When we click continue, we get sent to this other page, but we created a user in the backend. So now when we go over to MongoDB, I'm going to refresh the page. We should get a user that says test. As you can see here, this is the user we just created. And we have the select date, which is August 28th. And then we have the time range of 9:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. So this is a fully functional working booking application that you could easily implement into your application. So if this is something interesting, before we get started, if you could hit that like button and also subscribe for more content like this, it would be greatly appreciated. Other than that, let's just jump right into the code. So before we actually get started writing any code, I am on MUI.com and I'm looking over their docs, and we're going to go over it really quick together. So we are under the date and time pickers category and the getting started section. First thing you should notice is they have a community and pro plan. The community plan is free and the pro plan actually costs a monthly fee. So we're going to use the community plan for this tutorial. Next is you must choose the date library. So the date library is going to allow us to convert the dates and times inside of our application to send to the backend. So we are going to use the date library Day.js. They also give you 3 other options, but we're just going to use Day.js for this tutorial. Next is the packages we must install so we can actually use the MUI library. So the first package we're going to install is this @MUI/x-date-pickers, and then we must install the Day.js date library. After that, we must install 3 more packages, and they're going to be pure dependencies on the MUI/material. And this is going to allow us to actually use MUI's library. So these are our 5 packages we must install inside of our application before you even get started. So let's get to that right now. I am just going to minimize this, open up my code here, and my code is a blank Next.js 13 application using TypeScript and Tailwindcss. So what we're going to do here is we are going to open up the terminal and we're going to install the necessary dependencies for this project. So we are going to copy the first one. I like doing it in order. We will install the first package. Secondly, we will install Day.js. We will install that. And then we are going to install these 3 packages right here for MUI. And then after these 3 packages installed, we're just going to make sure we have all 5 dependencies inside of our package.json file. All right, so we're going to go in our package.json. We have the emotion React, emotion styled, we have MUI material, we have the date picker, and then we have Day.js. And these are the versions I'm currently using. If you're watching this video, the version should be the same or a later version. Okay, so if we scroll down inside of the docs, next thing we need to do is we need to set up the date library adapter. So we do actually need to provide a provider around our whole application so we can actually use the adapter. And what we're doing is we're going to use the adapter Day.js library. And if you're using a different library, just click at this drop down. If you're using Moment, and then the code will change slightly for you. But if you're using Day.js, just follow along. So what we need to do is all providers must be inside of a file that is a use client. And to wrap our whole application, it needs to be inside of our layout file, but we do not want our layout file to be a use client. So this has to be separate and we must import it inside of our layout, if that makes sense. So we are going to create a new folder on the root layer of our application and we're going to call it components. And inside of the components, we're going to create a new file, and this file is going to be called Localization Provider.tsx. This could be named any file you want, but it's better to name it something you know what it is. We are going to literally copy this code in here into our application, and I'm just going to rename the function. So let me wrap the code. And as you can see, we marked as a use client. We have the adapter.js, and we have the localization provider. And I named it the localization provider wrapper as the function name. And as you can see, it's wrapping all the children, and we are passing the date adapter in with the value of the adapter.js, adapter.js. So now we need to go inside of our layout, our root layout. We need to import the localization provider wrapper. And then what we are going to do here is we're going to wrap the whole body. So with that localization provider wrapper, and then we're just going to pass the body with the children. And now our application is fully wrapped and ready for us to use our date library. So before you get started coding, we want to make sure all of our files are cleared and ready to go and everything's organized as it should be. So inside of your page file, inside of the root layout, remove everything inside the return, and also just put a main element with the h1 of home, and remove all of the imports at the top. Next, you want to go to your globals.css file, remove lines 5 through 27, and keep lines 1 through 3 because we're going to use Tailwindcss for styling. Next, we want to create a route, and the way you do that is through folder structure. You create a new folder inside of the app directory, and we're going to call this calendar. And inside of the calendar, we're going to create a new file called the page.tsx. This is going to allow us to create a UI public facing page inside of localhost 3000/calendar. Now we want to make this a use client, and the reason why is because we're going to use the use state hook and the use effect hook. So we can import those two right off the bat. And then we're also going to use the use effect from React. Next, we want to import the date calendar and the TimePicker. So we're going to paste those imports here at the top, or you could just type it out. And then we want to import day.js. And we are ready to go with the imports. And now let's create the function. So we're going to do an export default function called calendar. And the first thing is we could work on the return. Inside of the return, we're going to have the parent div. And this parent div is going to have a few styles associated with it. I'm just going to copy them over and paste them in. And then inside of our div, we can have an h1 that says calendar. And then right under the calendar, we're going to have another div. This div is going to have a style of width of full. And then the first import we're going to use is we're going to use the date calendar. The way you use MUI calendars and time range components is with a self-closing tag just like that. And then the other one we want to use is the TimePicker. So they're going to be within the same div, and one is going to be on top of the other. And then right below the div that is wrapping both of our components, we're going to have a button called submit. So that's when we're going to submit the calendar and the TimePicker. Next thing I want to do before we continue is add state to both of these values so we can actually store the values of the calendar and TimePicker. But let's run the development server real quick. So npm run dev. It'll be on localhost 3000. I'm going to scoot this over real quick. And then the home page is just going to say home, as you see at the top left. We're going to go to calendar. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And as you can see, we have our H1 of calendar. We have our date calendar right here that allows us to pick dates. And then we also have our time range picker our time date picker right here. So you can pick any time you want, either with the clock or with this, and then we have our submit button. So everything is working good. And now let's add some values to the state actually of our components. So to do that, we want to create some state right below the function. So the first one is going to be called selected date and set selected date. And then we are going to have this as null. That's going to be our initial value. And then the type, it's either going to be a date or it's going to be null. Just like that. Next, we are going to have the selected time and set selected time, and it's going to be initial value of null. And then the types is going to be the date or null as well. And then one more state is we're going to have it either mounted or not mounted. And this allows us to make sure we have no hydration issues with Next.js 13. Because sometimes you do get hydration issues, and that's why we're going to use the use effect here. So whenever the page is loaded, we're going to set the mounted to true. And then we must check to make sure if it's mounted or not. So if it's not mounted, we're just going to stop it and return null. So that is going to help you with the hydration issues inside of Next.js 13. Now that we have these states defined here at the top, let's implement them inside of the actual components down here. So the first one is going to be value. So let me just style this a little better. The value is going to be the selected date. And then we are going to have an onChange. And inside this onChange, I'm just going to have an arrow function, and I'm going to have a new date. So whatever they select, and it's going to be an arrow function, and we're going to call the set selected date function, and we're going to pass in the new date selected. So that is going to change the date to whatever date you pick on the calendar. And then also we can add a property to the DateCalendar, which is provided to us by MUI. It is called disable pass. So they have a bunch of different properties. You could go through their docs, but disable pass means you can't select a date that is in the past of the current date. So the TimePicker, we are going to update the state here as well. We could pass in one of the props, which is called views. And in the views, we are just going to show the hours. And we also are just going to show the minutes. Let me get rid of that comma inside there. We don't care about the seconds. I don't care if somebody books by the second. It's usually just the hour and minutes people book. The value is going to be the selected time. And then the onChange is going to be the new time we're going to pass in. And it's going to call the function of the set selected time, and it's going to pass in the new time. So what we are going to do here is we have our values and state ready to go. Let's just test everything out to make sure. So we're going to go back to our localhost 3000. We're going to open up our dev tools. We are going to go inside of our components. Make sure you're in calendar, and then I have my state up here. So we see that the initial state we have currently is null and null. And then we also have another state that is true. And then we also have a use effect. Because this page did mount and it already did on use effects, so the set mount makes the mount true. And then we are going to select a date. So we selected a date, and that means our value changed. And if we look at our value, we have August 29th of 2023, which is the time and date I picked. And then we're going to try a time. So we're going to pick a time real quick. We could just do 1 p.m., press OK. We're going to look at it, and it says Saturday, August 26th at 1300 p.m., which is military time for 1 p.m. It's not 1300 p.m. my fault. It's 1300 time, which is 1 p.m. We are going to adjust this so it actually shows up more readable inside of the database. But the main thing is we are checking to make sure the state is actually working when we change it. So the state looks like it is working on both of our DateCalendar and TimePicker. So now we are ready to handle the next step. The next step we are going to work on is the on submit. So we are going to, well, it'll be an on click. So we're going to have an on click on the button. And on the on click, we are going to call the handle booking function, which we haven't created. So we're going to go up here and create that real quick. So we're going to call this cons handle booking. It'll be an arrow function. And inside of this arrow function, this is going to be an asynchronous function because we are going to send data to our backend API, which we're going to send all the information to MongoDB using Prism. But we have to install that in a little bit, but let's get through this as much as we can. So we are going to check if there is a selected date and there's a selected time, then we could perform this function. And it is going to be a fetch request. So we're going to store it inside of a response variable. We're going to await the fetch. And then we have to call our backend API. So we haven't called the backend API or even created it yet. So it's going to be /API /bookings. And then it's going to be a comma, and we are going to pass in the method, which is the post method, because we're sending data back. We have to pass in the headers, what kind of content type we're sending back there. We're sending in JSON data. And then the body, we are going to stringify. So this is where we're going to be able to change and format using Date.js. So as you can see, my Copilot is working pretty good, and I'm just going to make a few adjustments to that. But we are going to pass the date and the time. We are going to use Date.js. We're going to pass the selected date and the selected time, and we're going to format it. And the format for the date looks good. But the format for the time, I am going to change because I don't want military time, and the double H's capital make it military time. So we're just going to have one lowercase h, and then we don't care about the seconds as well. So we remove these seconds, and then we're going to have a capital A, which is going to be either AM or PM. So this is how we are going to send our data back to our backend API. And then after this, let's just make sure we close this off right. And we are not done yet because outside of the fetch, we are going to get the data. We're going to store it in a data variable, and we're just going to await the response.json because we're sending back the information in JSON format, and we got to catch it there. And then we could just run a console log of the data. So this console log is going to console log this variable, which is going to be the response we get back. Other than that, we need to create this backend API. We also need to initialize Prism, and then we also need to initialize MongoDB's database. So next, let's create this API booking. So inside of the app directory, we're going to create a new folder called API. And inside of the API folder, we're going to have another folder called bookings. And then we're going to have a file in there called route.ts. So this route.ts file allows us to make requests to any databases or resources or APIs that we need to make apparent. So there's a few things we could do on this page. We could just import the next response real quick from next/server. And then the next step I want to do is I want to actually set up Prism so we could create this backend route. Okay, so for Prism, I am on the Prism docs right now, and I'm inside the start from scratch, setting up Prism with MongoDB. So they have specific instructions on how you can actually implement MongoDB and Prism. So after project is set up, everything's good. You must run the commands npx prism. This is going to invoke the Prism CLI. And then you must run npx prism init, and this will create two files. It'll create an env file and also create a schema.prism file. So I've already done these two commands. You should do these right now. Go back in your code, run these two commands, and you will have those two files. And then after you do that, we must connect our database. And the way we do that is inside of the schema.prism, we must change the provider to MongoDB. And then the URL is going to be inside of the env file, and it's going to be under the variable database underscore URL. That is going to be from MongoDB. When we set up MongoDB, that is going to be allowing us to connect Mongo to our actual application with Prism as the ORM. And that's an example of how the MongoDB string will look. And then the next step they want us to do is create the Prism schema. So as you can see here, we are just going to create a model called user, and every model needs an ID. And as you can see, it has a decorator, and this decorator is specific to MongoDB, so we must use this as well. So we are going to copy this, go back in our code, and inside of our code, I already ran those two commands, and I have a schema.prism file. I changed the provider to MongoDB, and we are going to have a model called user. And the first thing is we need the ID with that decorator. That is how we're going to be able to connect and know which account we're using. And the only two things we're passing in for this demonstration purpose only is we are passing in the selected date, which is going to be a string. And then we're also passing in the selected time, which will be a string. Obviously, if you have a way bigger application, a full stack app, you're going to have a lot more properties that we're going to have to define the types of. But for now, like I said, for this application, those are the only two types we are defining to send to our MongoDB database. And if we look back at the docs, after we create the Prism schema, we are done creating the Prism schema. That's how quick it is. And then we must install the Prism client. So we're just going to copy this, and we are going to go back into our terminal, install the app Prism client. And what you should do for an application is create a global file, so then you could just import, export that Prism, so you could actually use the methods of Prism. So that's what the Prism client does. It allows you to use Prism methods inside of your API routes. But since we're only using one file, we're going to import the Prism client at the top of our API bookings. So I'm going to show you exactly how that looks. So after the import of next response, we are going to import Prism client. And this is from Prism /client. We're going to initialize it with the value Prism, just like that. We are going to have an async function called post. This is going to take in the request, and it is a request object, just like that. We're going to have a code block, and inside of the code block, we're going to have the variable body, and we're going to await the request.json. You could console log the body just to make sure that you're actually getting the information to the backend, but I'm pretty positive with my code I am, but we'll get the console log when we actually run it. And then we could destructure the body, and what we are passing to the back is the date and time, and that is just going to equal the body. I don't know why it's giving me all this other stuff. And let me just make sure I'm passing the date and time. So yep, we are passing date and time, and we're destructuring it just like that. And if you want, you could console log that as well to make sure it's getting parsed right and everything. Okay, so the next step for this backend code is we're going to have a variable called user. And now we're going to use one of the methods. And the reason why we could use the method is because we have the Prism client. So since we're interacting with an ORM or any database, we must await. And then we are going to do user.create method because we're going to create the user. And inside of this, we're going to have a data object. And inside the data object, we're going to have the selected date, which is going to be the date. And then we're going to have the selected time, which is going to be the time. And we've already initialized them in the schema.prism. And anytime you make updates to your schema.prism, you need to run npx prism generate, just so it makes those changes available to Prism and they knows what's going on. So after we do that, we just must return the next response.json, and we are returning the user and a status of, we're just going to give it a status of 200. So we're getting an error right here of date, and let me see why. If I press save, it might go away. And it's still not, oh, it's not date, my fault, it's data. It's not the date. I was thinking date here, date there, it's data. So our backend code is completely finished here. The only thing we need to do now is also set up MongoDB. So I'm gonna go back to my Google Chrome, open up a new tab, type in MongoDB in Google, and we'll set this up in literally 3 minutes. So you go to MongoDB. If you don't have an account, you could sign up, or you could log in with your Google. I'm gonna log in with my Google, or your GitHub as well. And inside of, when you get inside of MongoDB, you're gonna be met with the screen that looks similar to this. At the top left here, you have a bunch of projects. You could click new project. You can name your project whatever you want. We're just gonna call this MUI YouTube, like that. We're gonna click next. We could click create project. And then inside of here, we're gonna create a deployment. We're gonna use the free version. We're gonna use AWS as the provider. You're gonna click the region that with the star, because that's your recommended region. You could change the cluster name if you want, but I'm gonna leave mine as is. And I'm gonna leave the tag optional as blank. We're gonna click create. Now this is the hard part. So we must select all mountains and hills. That one's actually pretty easy. We're gonna change the username to whatever you want, and then make sure you remember the password. Or you could change the password to whatever you want. I'm just gonna leave mine as is. Open up a notepad. I'm just gonna paste the password there. Click create user. And after you create it, as you can see, the password is hidden and you won't be able to see the password again. So make sure you do save that password, or you know it. And then make sure you add your IP address and click finish and close. Go to overview, and then you're on a page like this. And then what we need to do here is we need to connect. So to connect, we are going to do MongoDB for VS Code. We are going to copy this string. This is going to be the string that connects our application to Mongo. We're going to go in the env file. We're going to replace this string here with the string that we got. And then inside of the password, we are going to replace our password with the password that I saved in my notepad. So let's go to our database.env URL. We're going to remove this. We're going to paste it in just like this. I'm going to add the user's end right here at the end, and I'm going to replace the password with the password in here as well. So paste just like that. And now we have our database connection string ready to go. And we should be successfully connected to MongoDB. You could test it out by console logging to make sure everything is ready to go. But for me, I feel pretty confident, so we're going to keep going. And what we are going to do here is we are just going to quickly review everything we've done and make sure all of the code looks right. So if you look on our front end code right here, this is our calendar page. If we click the button, we have a handle booking. We handle the booking, send it to our backend API, send this data back in this format. Then we console log the data, and then we're getting the data back as response.json. And then we could just do an alert if it is everything good. When good, we're going to say booking successful. And then all of this worked well. Our backend route is ready to go. Our provider is wrapping the whole application, and our schema Prisma is ready to go. So let's open up our terminal, run npm run dev. We're going to open up localhost 3000, go to /calendar, and now we're going to test this out. So I'm going to pick the 29th. And then for this, I'm going to say 3 p.m. I want my booking for whatever your booking application is. We're going to click submit. And it says booking successful. So that means all of the code went through without actually giving any errors. We are going to go to our MongoDB database. We are going to refresh this page real quick. We're going to browse the collection. And then we're going to see that the data is right here. So as you can see, we have an ID of that specific user. We have the selected date as August 29th of 2023 and the selected time of 3 p.m. So that means everything is working good. Let's just do it one more time to make sure everything is for sure working. So let's do the 31st at 5 p.m. Submit, booking successful. Refresh the page. And on August 31st, we have another booking at 5 p.m. So there's a lot more you can add to a booking application, but this video that I just did should get you up and running to actually create your own booking application. And if you did get any value out of this, I do recommend you hit that like button and also subscribe for more content like this. I do actually have a project, which is the project that you saw at the very beginning, which was the demo. I will put that source code in the link so you could see how that whole page was set up. And other than that, if you like this video, like I said, hit that like button. But other than that, happy coding.